Hello, this is Max Drake. I want to talk about the expenses app that I'm doing as a progressive web app here. I've got to this point in the last video where I got the total spent in the month, which was actually just adding up all of these items through here. I got the edit button on there so that I can actually go through and edit an item, and it'll update in the database, so I can make that 46 if that's what it was, and it goes through and updates through there. And I stopped it from actually going through and repeating the form, so now if I do a refresh, all of that's up there as it's supposed to be. So where I'm at this point in time is here. I've got to the point where I've started to look at the forecasting side of things. So I've got the total spent up the top as it is, which is adding up all these spent items down the bottom through here. And now I've got a budget total through here. I've also got an item through here, or an item button at the top there, where I can actually create another single forecast item. Like I can actually put 1050 WCC rates NOV week 4, and which week, and I'll say week 4 through there, and I'm going to choose a category, and it's going to be the house. It's going to choose the month, so that is actually November, and it ends at the beginning of the next month. And I choose if it's part of the current month, no, and choose if paid, no. I'm not too sure whether I should actually have that. And I can create a single item. So that's handy if I suddenly realise I've got a new item, and then I can actually say, well, have I paid it? Because I've just suddenly paid it. And I thought, well, actually, that should have been added to the budget. So I can actually now add it into that particular item through there. So I can add in that budget item, and that budget item, if we just come down to week 4, no, that's the rates quarterly. That's when WT rates November W4. So that's the one that I've just put in there. So that's another addition. So I'm able to push one in. So that's actually, that was quite handy, because if you actually want to add another one in there, you've got to go auto ID. You've then got to put in the field, and which will be this field, and then this field, and this field, and then you've got to put in the value, and you've got to say what sort of type it is, string or whatever. So coming through and just pushing it through, and it's pushed everything through a string. Even I've got an item through here, I've got the sum as a string, but the other one was a string. So I suddenly thought, well, if that's where it is at the moment, just leave them as they are. And I've got an order, but because it's a single number, I can actually order everything quite easily. It does 1, 2, 3, 4 quite easily. Numbers are orders by those. So I've got these items. So the logic behind the expense items as I've got them is that I've got the name of what it is. It's got an indication of which week it's coming through. It's got the sum of what that one is. And then it's got the category that it's in. And then there's this item through here. This one at the bottom says it's in August. This one up here says all. That means every month it repeats itself all the time. So I've got ones which will repeat all the time, and I've got ones which only happen intermittently. The next one, I've got this item called true through here, which in fact called, is it a current month? So is this relevant for the current month? And if it's true, as in it's a current month, it will show them, and it will do a sum of all of these items through here. And then has it been paid? So as you go through the month, at the beginning of the month, there's a whole lot of items that I've got. So I've got it in inverse order, so from the early in the month to the latest in the month. So if something's been paid, I can just hit that P button, and that false changes from false to true, and it gets disappeared off the list. So this is actually doing a filter in ascending order from 1 to 4, because they actually have an order numbered against them. It's then ordering by whether this is true, so whether it's part of the current monthly bills that are part of it, and then if this is false. If it says true, then it hides it. The total budget is just done on whether it's true, it's beginning for this month, and I think it's done by order as well, but it doesn't need to be done by order. So it's actually just doing a total based on whether it's true. So that's how that's doing that add up. So it doesn't matter if you do anything down here, this sum will always stay the same, unless you decide to add another item specific for that month, in which case that'll go and change. But that'll only change again when you just do the refresh and it's been added. So even if you go true and it's been paid true, as long as that one's true in there, it'll be actually added to the total. So now I've got the total of the budget and I've got the total of the spent amount. Now, I did intend to actually have all of this forecasting stuff on a separate tab. But what I was finding was initially the database initialization was on the index page. And when I moved across to the Forecast.html page, it suddenly couldn't find the DB. It suddenly, when I went to that page in the DB at the very top here, I've now moved this to this point here. But, sorry, this is the initialization. When it says enable persistence, it couldn't find this DB. It said, I don't know where this variable is. Thank you very much. Although it was on the index page. But because I was on the forecast page, it seemed to didn't recognize it. So I moved the initialization of the Firebase across onto the JavaScript at db.javascript. Doesn't seem to make any difference about the forecasting page. And even if I got the DB bit to work, I would suddenly have issues of event listeners not working. So in the end, I just decided I'd shove everything onto one page and get the blooming thing working, because I wanted the functionality working first. So I suddenly said everything gets working on the functionality page through here. So I've got my add button coming through here where I can add an expense, which was before. I've got add an item through into the database, which I can do through here. So that's adding another expense item, and I can actually set it to thing. The button that I've yet to do is this one here, which will add all of the items that I need for the forecast. Now, although this is just showing gobbledygook through here, and this is, I can select one through here, but it doesn't do it very well. If I show you the screenshot on my app, when I open up that pull down list, I can actually hit all of these switches through here, and there's even more of them on the next page through here. Also, that other item that actually had those ones, I can, at this point in time, it's got a little radio button, I can select one or the other. I'll most probably make that select multiple as well, because there'll be ones, and I'll order this list here by items that are not necessarily every month, but in an order from January to December, so that as you go through the year, you can select the ones which are relevant. So although I've got this rather ugly looking bit of switchy stuff on my app at the moment, that's the next bit that I've done. Now, the logic that I've got behind here is that each of these documents actually has a document ID, so it's got a GUID. So my idea, or my thinking, which is the next part of doing this in the code, is to associate that list item with its GUID. So it says when you actually click on that one, select that one, go to this document inside the database and do something. So that's a way of initializing all of the items that you want to be current, that you can then set up your stuff. So we can do that from the front end. The only problem I have with this is when we actually go to add a new item to the database through this switch here, because it's creating a GUID in the background as it goes and puts one through, it creates a new GUID. Somehow I've got to find that GUID ID and put it into an item through here. So I haven't tested this out or anything. It's just my thinking on it as to what I actually want to do. So that's my next challenge at this point in time. Now, a couple of things going through on that. When if we look at the earlier version that I actually had, you'll see I've still got this one here as a card. But when I went through and started to run this was the first card I had. When I did this budget item, all this did was this card overwrote this one. So I found that was a bit of a nuisance. I got the information, it was just overwritten, so I couldn't actually view it. So the card didn't work for those upper items through there. They do work with these iterations as you go through the list, but they only give you with the one card at the top. And I didn't really want to figure that out. That was sort of like trivial imagey stuff that, you know, it's CSS stuff that I needed to get my head around. So all I've done with that, if we just go on through and look at the code in that particular area, inside the UI, I've got a lot of these variables. I set these arrays to empty arrays at the top outside of the function, and I also set these totals outside of the functions as 0. And then when they iterate through and you push each new item in the array as it comes out of the database and gets pushed into the arrays, it then gets summed. And as it sums each new one that's added into the array. But those variables, because they're outside, I can actually access them from anywhere else. So they're globally accessible instead of just being inside this function through here. So that's been handy, because when I was this one actually did this exercise for the summing, and then it wrote a string literal down the bottom for this one here. And then when I did this one, this wrote a string literal to do with the forecasting. The top one did a string literal for all of the sum ones, which was the spent one items. And so what I was able to do was to actually combine one string literal with all of that information into one location, so that I was able to display it. And because they're both accessible together, I can start doing things with them. I can actually say, this is a percentage of this. So I can divide that by that and multiply it by 100 to see what percentage it is of it and things. So I can start doing some sums through here. So that's quite handy with that. So on the next part of it, as far as starting to put some information in on here, I can start saying, well, you know, you're 75% of your total budget you've spent so far, and you're only so many days into the month or whatever. So you can give an indication that, you know, you're in week 2 and you already spent 75 of the budget, and it should be for 4 weeks, so you're in trouble. We can start doing some of that. Or again, as I said in the previous video, I want to see if I can do a sort of progress bar on these items. So I just made those string literal. I didn't make them into a card. So if we go through the original code for those inside the UI, for the other ones, I've got a card panel. So these are the card panels inside of the pretty stuff that I'm doing, the CSS coding things. So this one I took out the card, so it's not creating a card, it's just writing it onto that particular area, the background. And then these are writing below. So that's what these ones are doing. So that's ticking through at this point in time. So most of the things I've got working, because the buttons, these ones here, are visually bad, I've got to go onto my app and load that up. I've got to go onto my phone and do it there, because they don't seem to be displaying correctly there. And I haven't tested them on an iPhone yet. I've only tested them on one Android phone. I'm having issues with both Firefox and Chrome, is that it's not released. I'm not able to clear the storage, and so within Chrome you go up into settings inside Chrome, you then go into site settings, you go into storage, and then you go and clear the cache and reset in there, and that isn't working. I'm actually having to go into the phone settings button. I go down into apps, I go and find Chrome, I force stop, I clear cache, I even deactivate and reactivate, just so that I've actually, and then it opens up. It does do it inside of incognito. It doesn't, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I think it's whether I've cleared the cache inside of Chrome in some ways. That's without actually going into the phone settings and stopping the app through there. But I can't do a screenshot inside incognito. So that's a bit of a nuisance when I want to come and explain what's actually happening and how it looks through there. So the thinking which I actually have on this next part of this button through here is that I can select a whole lot of things through here, and then I've got to push them into an array. Now, if I was working in a form, I started to watch Ninja's HTML and CSS tutorials, and one of them was the actual HTML form. It's got this action button and it's got a get button. So if you select some things, it goes and puts that string up inside your address bar as other things on the end of the element that it's going to. So I'm wondering whether if I push those up onto a string, and if I put all of those database ID numbers onto there, the database document ID numbers into there, that I can then put that into an array and then iterate through them and do some sort of function through there. So I haven't quite figured out this. This has taken me a long while to redo a lot of the interface through here just to get all of the points that I actually need to display as to how I need them to be. So this one still needs an edit button on it so that I can actually go in and suddenly saying, well, actually my food, it doesn't quite meet my budget requirements, and I'm overspending on that, so I'm going to reset my food budget to 105 each of these ones here. So I need to go through and edit on those ones through there, and I also need to have a reset to 0. So what I've got to do with the reset to 0 is to turn all of the ones which actually say, is this a current item, to say no, it's false. So therefore there's no budget items at all. And then I can then go through on this button through here, in this area here, and choose them. So at the beginning of the month, I can clear out the budget and I can reset my budget. So that's one of the next objectives that I've got to do. First of all, I've got to be able to go and get multiple items and be able to get the IDs of those to go into the document database and actually reset those document IDs where they are, whether it's a current item, from true, and actually just set them all as false. Or maybe another button might be to actually just say go through, because the the forecast is only going to be about 30 or 40 items really, or might be 50, 60, but it can actually just to go through each of those and actually just make sure reset paid to false and reset current to false is an easy enough thing to do. So a lot of the ones have all got let's go and find some. So that's true and that's paid true. So if I actually go false in there, that'll return up on my item through there. So if I come back into there, that one's now turned back up again in week 1 because of the fact it's just now got the false modified. So I can go through and do a single iteration where I just go through and reset everything again. Then I need to reset the items that I want to true. So I can do that best by getting the document ID of all of those items and then setting them to true. Now, the other one inside the form as well, the notion would be quite nice inside this form here if I just had a switch that just said select all. If I had a switch that just said select all, it would select all of the items into there, in which case for the week 5, I might actually have to put those into the other ones where I've got, I choose a variable, the ones depending on date. So that's the next part of the step. But to get to where I've got to today, it doesn't look as if there's a lot of work, but there's been a lot of pain to get there. So I thought it was a handy point to pause to start, because I've got a lot of my information now. I've got this where I can compare these two things. I've got this whereas I can switch them off so that I can do that, but I've still got my budget totals. I've got this part through here. The next bit in the app is to be able to clear it and empty it out, set a new date to the 1st of the next month. Somehow that might just be a pull down list or something, or a button or a way of actually getting that number, because as we know, that is actually based on in the database it's based on that epoch number there. So I've got to go and find whatever the first is of the 9th and the first of the 10th and the first of the 11th and the first of the 12th and the first of the 1th, and get that epoch number and actually just go and do a selection by there. They automatically, so I have that as a variable and it just bangs that one in to wherever it occurs. I think it only occurs in a couple of places. There it is down there again. So if I get that, then that will automatically go through and reset my expenses to nothing. And the other thing that I was thinking of is, because it's quite powerful, you don't want to be able to go in and start mucking around with it. So what I was thinking with that button and also with the reset button is either put it right at the very bottom so it's not obvious and you've got to go looking for it, or else putting it into this form as a switch through here. So you've actually, they're not easily accessible. You might quickly on the fly want to actually add another item. You've just got to spend the money. You thought, oh, I better budget for that next year round or for next time or something like that. So you can quickly add that in, and that's good to be able to do that on the fly, to add something more to the database, because the more complete your forecasting is, as far as the information that you got in your forecasting, the more you're going to accurately be able to measure your spend against it. If you're only doing this simplistically, you can quite easily overrun on some of these things. So the more accuracy you've got with this, but that's, as I said, is that the dilemma which I've got is, how do I get, because this is going, I'm actually pushing a new thing in for the database at this point in time. So I don't actually have a database ID for this. I don't have a document ID, and this is new. So somehow I've got to think about how to do that. Maybe I'm just not going to be able to do it, and I'll leave this at 90% done and say, well, I accept it for what it is. And that'll be the learning for that part of it. So the next part is going to be a challenge, but if I get the next part going, which is basically clearing it out and then re-choosing items for the choosing the items for the budget for each month, and if I can do that from the front end, then it's better than what I've got in the Glide app. The fact that all of these things are all on the same screen, handy that I don't actually have to start jumping screens to do it. Not as elegant as what I want. Maybe I also need to do some a bit of colouring through here. So anything to do with an expense is the orange, and then maybe these ones all need to be a green or turquoisey or teal or whatever that is, so that these ones and these ones being teal and these ones actually having a light peach at the back of them as well. So you're clearly differentiating which ones are related to, and so therefore this one here, if this is how it's going to be displayed, is going to be, although it'd be better maybe to actually have the forecast, the budget, see how much you spent, and then your percentages all the way along, or again, as I said, progress bars or something. So, but again, colour one so that you're clearly seeing what you're actually doing. So if it's a progress bar, then you'd want it orange to see the progress bar on to maybe a green background, which actually says, well, that's my total, and that's how far you've got on that one. So they're sort of things you're sort of dealing with the problems that you got now, reflecting about what's actually going to come through in the future. One of the things with the database, when I did it, I didn't have order, and then I suddenly thought, well, it would be really handy to actually have these in the order of, as soon as you've gone and spent them and you pay for that invoice, you just hit the switch, you just say that one's been done. So as you increment down through the month, you can actually see which ones you've been dealing with the bills as you go. The one slightly inelegant thing is you're suddenly thinking, well, this was one of my earlier ones. I'm now in week 3. Did I spend that or not? So I've got to come down and check all the way down here as to whether that one's been done. So, but again, hopefully you're not doing that too frequently. So that's the thing. There might be another little addition to this. I was just thinking about this. A lot of these are a fixed amount, like my broadband. It's a fixed amount, And because it's on a certain day, you could also automatically actually make it happen so that it actually just adds that one on automatically, because I do forget some of the ones that I do online or set up my automatic payments online. I forget to actually come through and do them. So it's only when I see this reminder here that I suddenly think, oh dear, I better actually add that because it isn't actually in my expenses at the moment. So sometimes I think I'm doing better than what I'm actually doing. So, but that's a refinement later on. I just want to get the basic app working. From the point of view of how long it's taken me about 2 weeks to get this far. I'm doing an awful lot of learning from scratch. A lot of the HTML stuff that I'm doing, I haven't played with it for a while, so especially things like forms and some of the stuff with that. CSS as well, cards I'm not that familiar with. A lot of the JavaScript in the DOM area I'm not that familiar with either. So there's an awful lot of learning that I'm getting from this. From the point of view of the Glide app, I'm still not there yet. I still can't match what the Glide app has done. And that one most probably took me overall a week to do. And that was a no code. So doing the code, I'm having to put in a massive amount of learning to actually get to anywhere with the other ones. So the no code ones definitely have a value for where they were. The pleasure with this is that based on the Net Ninja scaffolding of what he's actually done, has set up the whole service workers and all the rest of them and get the PWA to work. It's getting there, and one of the things that I can actually do at this point in time is see my performance isn't good, my best practices are good, SEO is okay, and accessibility is okay. But one of the things with the that you can increase your performance a bit is to actually reduce minify all of your text, so your JavaScripts and all of those, is to minify all of those. And that you can only do at the end. So in some ways, a lot of these performance items you can't really deal with until you go through there. So eliminate render blocking resources. And again, sometimes I'm making too many calls to the database. But mine is first get the thing working and then do a little bit of refactoring or whatever to actually make it more efficient. First of all, and from my point of view, there's some remove some JavaScript. I'd like to go and see which ones that is that can be used. So I hope this has been of interest to you. It's been of great frustration to me, but it's also been a good challenge to work with. And I'm sort of pleased it's sort of changing what it was meant to be, as far as it was meant to be happening on other pages, and it was supposed to be a lot cleaner than this. But even then, it's actually working. I'm pleased with what I actually have. This sort of works. I think it's quite elegant, and I think putting some of these swishes right at the bottom so that I know they're there, but they're not. If they're up the top, I'd be so tempted to play with them that halfway through a month I can see myself stuffing my budget up and having to rebuild up the whole thing again and doing it different than what it was the first time. So I do have to think about my own fiddle factor with these sorts of things. Anyway, I hope that's been of interest to you. Thank you very much for watching. If you found it useful, can you please give a thumbs up? If not, don't worry, and you might even consider subscribing and also becoming a patron. Thank you very much indeed.